Okay, so I have some statistics. So 10 years, 19 films. The average gross of each film was $343 million. The total gross of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is approaching $7 billion. And after 10 years, they just released their two biggest hits ever back-to-back, Black Panther and Avengers Infinity War. That's pretty amazing. So I'm really excited to talk to the two guys that really started it all. Producer Kevin Feige and director Jon Favreau. Thanks for coming, guys.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So I want to talk to you about the MCU and its 10th anniversary, but Kevin, do you want to give people like a brief history of Marvel before this started? Because Marvel was around making films for years before them.
Marvel was a comic book company at first.
I did not know that.
Yes. I started at Marvel 18 years ago, having been a part of the first X-Men film. And the film that I did soon after starting, that they were just getting into prep on, was Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man film. So for the first 6 years or so, we were a part of a lot of other studio films. Universal was doing a Hulk film, Fox had the X-Men films, Sony had the Spider-Man films. And around 2000,
there was a Daredevil movie too, I hear.
There was a Daredevil movie with a great Foggy Nelson.
Really good cast, except for one guy.
A couple Fantastic Four movies, and Electro, and they all made money. And it was fun to be a part of that. For me, it was fun to see how all the different studios worked and the inner workings of each studio. And Marvel did not have a lot of power contractually. But we sort of had a right to be there, and what I tried to do was earn the trust of everybody involved and become a creative partner. And they didn't have to listen to us, but we would try to get them to listen to us. Sometimes we succeeded, sometimes we didn't. And around 2006, we ended up getting financing to do it ourselves. And Iron Man was the first film of Marvel Studios, which people also forget, John doesn't forget, Iron Man 1 was an independent movie with a completion bond company, with foreign pre-sales, everything that comes along with an independent movie. None of them afterwards were independent movies, but this one was.
And John, what was your first involvement with Marvel? Was it when you acted in Daredevil?
Yeah, I acted in Daredevil. I met Avi Arad, who was a producer on all the films Kevin mentioned, and he had a relationship with Marvel previous to it sort of overlapped with the toy business, and he comes out of that's where he started off, and but he was a producer on Daredevil. I had gotten to know him there, and we kind of remained in contact. I had worked with Mark Steven Johnson on a movie called The Replacements that he was doing rewrites on, and so I met him there. And then when the role of Foggy Nelson came up, I was like, yeah, I'd love to do it. I did that, and I remember they were all going to Comic-Con, and I didn't make the cut. And I was like, what's Comic-Con? It sounds really cool. And then the movie did okay. It wasn't a hit. It wasn't a bomb, and it was fun to be a part of. And then after I had that relationship had kept going, and I had started to direct more films. I'd become more of a filmmaker than a character
Was
actor.
Elf before or after Daredevil?
It was after.
It was after. That's right.
It was after, and so as my name was popping up on lists, I knew Avi, and as Kevin pointed out, it wasn't like this was a prime piece of material. Everybody thought that the superhero thing might have worn out its welcome, and to remember back then it was Nolan was doing The Dark Knight and all the super cool Batman.
It was the same
movies.
summer, right? Dark Knight came out. Batman Begins came out a couple years before, but
Yeah.
Dark Knight was after you guys, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So it pretty much breathed new life into the genre because it was making money, getting good reviews, and he's a fantastic filmmaker, and so we were kind of the off-brand because Batman was the thing, and it was kind of good to be in their shadow, to be honest with you, because it allowed us to have the freedom to just do our thing, and nobody expected much of us. There was a certain amount of money that the Marvel movies had made, and there was a bit of a formula as Marvel started their studio, is spend a certain amount of money, have a certain amount of action sequences, the hero's the star, So you don't need a big star to sell the movie, and if you spend the right amount of money, you'll make the right amount of money, and it's a good business. We got really lucky with Robert because he was doing it for, he was not an expensive movie star at the time. And so we were able, I wasn't an expensive director, he wasn't an expensive movie star, and we really put it together like an independent film, and then we attracted people that would have normally been in independent movies, like Jeff Bridges and Gwyneth, and then that's when it started to get kind of cool, because we were, as long as the action sequences were going to be on point, everybody at Marvel kind of knew that we were doing our job, and then everything else between the action sequences, we got to have a lot of fun and freedom and a lot of improv and a lot of, just the tone that we came up with here came out of a lot of, first in the scripting process, then while we're shooting, and then in the editing room, and some short, some limited reshoots, we really found the personality of this, and people really like the idea of Robert coming back, and people really like the idea of this hero. The tech too, the CGI, the hard surface CGI had really gotten good with ILM. They had just done Transformers, so I started to become convinced that maybe we didn't have to do everything practically in certain areas, and so for the first time you could show a superhero do the stuff that you saw in this movie, and so that was sort of a lucky confluence of events and trends and technologies, and people who were at the point in their career that we knew enough to be able to make the film, but we also were early enough in our career to take chances and not really be scared to try something different that we like. But right up till the very end, we didn't know how it was going to turn out. We knew we liked it, but we were biting our nails all the way through, pretty much till that first Comic-Con where we revealed the first footage, and that's kind of when we knew that people would like it as much as we did.
It was a Paramount release, and they did a good job marketing it and distributing it, but they didn't have much skin in the game. We were paying for it. They would get a small percentage of the profits, and they really did do a good job, and obviously because the movie did so well and was marketed so well. But they were doing another movie that came out 3 weeks after us that they had a big stake in, which was the next Indiana Jones movie. The first Indiana Jones movie in however many years.
19 years, yeah.
In 19 years. So from Comic-Con to every marketing meeting we kept thinking we were second fiddle to Indiana Jones, and it didn't feel that way coming out of that first Comic-Con.
Well, it's funny, I was going to ask you about that, because I remember that summer, it's like, whatever you think of the movie, Indiana Jones is the greatest hero ever, and it had been a long time, and you guys actually made more money than they did, like in the US. Like, you were very close, and I remember
you would not have believed that if you told us that.
Yeah, I was going to ask. It's like,
when
that someone said, hey, you guys are actually going to outgross Indiana Jones by a couple $1 million. Like, would you have believed it?
We didn't know. It's a weird thing, and I don't know if any of you have worked on something where you believe fully that it's terrible and going to bomb, and you also believe that it's going to outperform everybody's wildest expectations. It's part of the creative process, I think, where you don't really have a gauge, and so you just have to put the work in every day, do your best job. It's like, I think Paul Thomas Anderson said about the editing process, that you look at the assembly and it's terrible, and you work on it every day, and each day it sucks a little bit less, and then one day it becomes good or great. You don't know when you pass that line. So all you could concentrate on is the work, is not being lazy, is being open to new ideas, and challenging yourself, and not sort of, not giving up the opportunity to make the most of an opportunity. And I think that's where we really did, that was one of the things I learned from working with Kevin, was he was constantly challenging. And Robert also, in different ways, was constantly challenging the material, the dialogue. We would stay up and rewrite a scene, and then we'd come in the next day and Robert would say, no, we gotta work on this. And I'd be like, we signed off on it last night. Like, we stayed all night so we could finish this, and finally he says, I think I just don't like paper. Like, if he sees it on paper, he doesn't like the dialogue. But the point was, he would always challenge it to make it better, to discover something new. In the editing room, Kevin's very much that way. And it would be about finding everything you could in the cut, and then, it would be just, if we just had this one scene or this one line of dialogue, it would really tie it all together. And it was the first time I ever done a reshoot where the movie got much better from the reshoot. Usually as an actor, when you're asked to do a reshoot, it's kind of haphazard, it's desperate, it doesn't end up in the movie most of the time. But with this, we had a real surgical, like week-long set of reshoots that really crystallized everything and turned it into the movie that you saw. So I think it's a work ethic too, and I think it's a commitment to doing the best you can. And that's part of what's good about this business is it's not an easy business to get into. So by the time you get your opportunity, you are incentivized to work 110%. And I had never been that way at other jobs and other things in life, but when you work really hard for something and you have passion, when you get there, you inherit all of that momentum and energy that took for you to get there. And everybody around you has gone through the same process. Everybody I work with in this business loves what they do. Otherwise they would be doing something else. And so there's something about what comes out of a process where people are completely mindful and enthusiastic and bringing everything they have to bear. And that's really what I enjoy about this, because we hadn't seen this movie in a long time. I look at it and I see flaws in it and things. And if I could tell the story, Jeff Bridges on this movie, we were up doing rewrites and figuring out what tomorrow's work's going to be, and of course there wasn't enough time because it was a basically relatively low budget negative pickup for the scope of what we're doing. And Bridges was like, hey guys, come to my trailer for a drink after wrap. And me and Kevin are like, we have to rewrite tomorrow's scene, and Robert's waiting to see. And we're like, we gotta go, let's get Jeff Bridges, we gotta go in there. So we go in there, and it's the dude, so we're in there with the dude. And his stand-in was there, mixing, shaking martinis. And he was there.
His stand-in does.
His does, that's why I thanked him at the Oscars. And so he's there, and he's relaxing in like a robe, and he's getting out of his bald, no, he was bald, it was a bald wig, yeah. And we're sitting and talking, and he's totally relaxed, and we're pretending to be relaxed. And as he's talking, he says, yeah, we did a good scene today. That was pretty cool what we did. I wasn't expecting that, and it was a really good moment. And then he stops himself. He says, he says, the movie, that's just the skin of the snake. He says, this is the real thing. Do you remember that? I guess he meant like the process of making the movie and the camaraderie and those memories. And he's right, like the movies are great, but you start off thinking, I can't wait to have the poster on my wall or see my name on the screen or be in something or make a movie. But really it's that process, and a lot of the people we work with on these movies don't even watch them. Maybe they see it once, maybe they see it at the premiere, if that, but they love making them. And that's the fun part of going to work, is being together with people like that.
That's awesome. Well, I want to back up for a second to see how we led to you directing this. So this is your first movie, you're starting a new studio. First of all, why Iron Man? I mean, a lot of your other characters were sort of out there, but you had obviously other ones to sort of look at. What made Iron Man the one that you guys wanted to do first?
We had everything except, as I said before, the Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, the X-Men, and Hulk, which at the time, if you didn't read comics, you thought that's all Marvel were those other characters. So we knew that we had the rights to everything else, but at the time, everything else didn't mean a whole lot to the world. New Line had been developing an Iron Man film for many years.
With Tom Cruise, right? For a while?
No, never officially, but he sort of talked about it at one point. Did we ever talk about Tom Cruise after you started? Yeah, like there was some initial conversation. I remember a deal term memo came through on a fax machine. And I was like, oh, no, forget that. So we knew the character had great potential. And we knew that potential wasn't coming to life in what New Line was doing. So what Marvel had done for years and years and years up to that point was a studio would try to develop something. They'd develop it for years. It wouldn't. They couldn't get it going. They had to pay Marvel just, I don't know exactly what the amount was, but a relatively very small amount, a few $1,000s, to extend the rights for another however many years. And this had been going on for years and years. We were getting our own financing, we were getting our own studio, and the expiration date came up, and New Line said, okay, we'd like to do this. And Avi said, nope, no, we're gonna take it back. And I think they were sort of surprised. And it was then that we said, let's make this first. It wasn't, a super soldier. From World War II, it wasn't a Norse god with a hammer. It was an easier entry point. And it was a great character. Tony Stark's a great character with a great origin story, and something that we believed we could pull off and could be unique from the X-Men's and the Spider-Mans that had come before us.
So John, what drew you to want to do this?
You got to remember these offices were like new offices above a Mercedes dealership on Beverly Boulevard. It wasn't like on a big studio lot, and it felt very much like what Kevin describes. It wasn't. It wasn't set up by people who had been in the movie business, and it wasn't like inheriting the traditions, what you normally see when you go in there. But there were all the cool comic book stuff, like the maquettes and the sculptures, and the first meeting. And I remember there was talk about Hulk also. That was another title. So that was going to be their first two. And it was more of a general conversation. There wasn't a script yet. It was just I knew who Iron Man was and Tony Stark was from growing up reading the old comics. And I remember being really intimidated because I was not into CGI at all then. I felt I was very much into practical effects. If you look at other films I had done before it, I had done forced perspective, stop motion, motion control, miniatures. I really liked the stuff I grew up with, like the old Star Wars stuff and all that 80s tech. And CG, with rare exception, I felt it was overused. It wasn't used well. But Jurassic Park was great, but then it never seemed to hit that high watermark again. And then and Hulk really was. I didn't think, because Ang Lee had already done Hulk,
The
a different
2003
version
yeah.
of Hulk, right? And so I didn't trust the workflow and what CGI was capable of, especially with organic. But with the hard surfaces, it's a lot. It really holds up. Even the old stuff, even like the Pixar Luxo Jr. holds up incredibly well, or Tin Toy. So the idea of Iron Man felt much easier of a sell. And I also like the notion of Tony Stark as being somebody who wasn't just a kid, sort of Peter Parker's more the classic story, a kid coming of age, and that's the monomyth you're dealing with. And this was a little bit different because it was somebody who was conflicted and somebody with a checkered past who was being reborn in a sense and having a moral awakening. And for the point in my life I felt I could relate more to a character like that. And I hadn't directed a lot of movies at the time, and it's always better if you could find something you could personally connect with. And I thought that was an intriguing myth to explore.
So what was it about John that you thought he was the right guy for this?
There had been a number of meetings. There was a relationship, as John said, on Daredevil, and Avi had stayed in touch with him. But the truth is, I thought Elf was brilliant, and again, now it's a classic, and we see it, and people cheer for it because it gets better and better, and more of a classic every year. But even before we were thinking about doing Iron Man ourselves, I remember watching Elf and going, "This is an incredibly well done film." And I still contend that Santa getting the energy back in his sleigh through Central Park and flying up with is one of the best action sequences ever put together. You know exactly what the rules are, you know what the mythology is, you know what's at stake. It was great. And I remember sitting in the theater going, why do I have chills at this Will Ferrell comedy with this sleigh flying around? This took a deft hand. And as there were other people in the mix and talking to, I, at least for myself, kept thinking back to that moment. Not to mention Maid and not to mention Swingers and Zathura, but really that moment is what I thought. And he came in and had nothing but great ideas. And I remember within one of the first meetings suggested the structure of the opening of the movie. Maybe in the very first meeting, suggested starting with the X and then going back and meeting him to the cave.
I was thinking that while watching it, and that I love the first 45 minutes, but I was just imagining if you went into a studio and pitched that your main character is going to be in a cave tinkering with stuff for like the first like half hour of the movie, that like most studios are like, no, you're not going to do that, but it's like some of my favorite stuff in the movie. Were you guys worried about that, or did you feel really confident? It's like, okay,
a little worried about everything. I mean, it wasn't like, it's a whole different But we had, we had the benefit of low expectations, which I can't overstate how important that is in your career. Everybody wants build up and no, the opposite. Over deliver, surprise people, and they'll always love you if you give them more than they think they're going to get. It becomes harder for this guy here because he's got to top everything.
That's why it was catatonic in the days leading up to Infinity War coming out.
But you've been doing it at some run, and just it's been really fun for me because I've gotten to be part of the family and participate either as a supporting figure or an actor in it, and get to be part of the experience of it. But this guy's had to sweat it out and white knuckle it through 19 films where everybody is looking to Marvel to do something special. And I have to say, look, I think we got lucky to a certain extent here. We worked hard, but things broke our way. But to have a run like you've had for so long, luck is out of the equation. I mean, you've really found a way to deliver and surprise and stretch yourself and take chances. And so I really love, as somebody who's part of the starting of this, to see how the legacy has been continuing and the chances that you continue to take in the spirit of what we did here. So thank you, Kevin.
Well, very kind of you, sir. The truth is, we learned almost all of it working with John on Iron Man 1. Not only a collaborative process, but their people. Lou Esposito, our co-president, worked with John on Zathura, came on to line produce, executive produce this movie. We hired him. Now he's done all 19 movies. Victoria Alonso came in through Lou and through John. Dan Liebenthal, the director, who did this film for us, worked with John in the past, is currently, probably still right now, finishing Ant-Man and the Wasp for us, having done Spider-Man and all sorts of movies for us. Ryan Meinerding, who I hope you guys know, he's a brilliant artist who has brought almost all of our characters to life, started with John, who worked with him on a film prior to starting with Iron Man. And even the process of doing visual development meetings every week or multiple times a week started with John. We were a studio, but we were also producers, and we had to find our way in that because that's sort of an unusual combination. And it was John who, and there are ways, he could have been very protective. He could have closed himself off. He could have asked for a door with a lock on it to keep us out and only send things. And maybe you tried to do that early on. I don't remember. But it became very open, and it was like, well, why am I telling getting notes from 5 different people at 5 different times? Everybody come in. Let's throw it up on the screen. Talk about it in the moment. Make a decision and move on. And we now do that. We've done that for 20 plus films now. And it started with John and him being so creatively open to it. And it's still, I just take it for granted. That's the way you make movies. There's still sometimes people come into the process and go, wait, how's this working? What are we doing? And they quickly pick up on it because they know this is the way it is. But it all started with you. And the tonality of having moments that are really serious. When Tony Stark said, when Pepper sees him killing himself and is nervous for him and is crying, saying, I can't do this anymore. And he says, I finally know what I have to do and I know that it's right. That's as serious and heartfelt as you get. And at the same time, the robots that spray him with fire extinguishers. That's the secret.
Let's talk about the tone, because I really think, like, you guys did establish a tone that you carried forward in all the other Marvel movies, but it was coming out of a time where, like the Nolan Batman and everything, like the Bourne movies, were just really dark. And like for me growing up, like Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, like Indiana Jones, there was a lot of humor in those movies, but it felt like we were in a time when it kind of moved away from that. And I feel like you guys kind of brought it back. Like how did you find that tone of kind of real but fun, where you have those amazingly human moments, but then you also have this great, remind me of Chaplin with like Downey with all the things sort of pulling on him and like the comedy of the, the fire extinguisher and stuff.
I mean, to me, I look at the masters like a painter would, and one name that always pops up, I'll always watch, is Buster Keaton, because he really knew how to work the frame and really use technology and film technique to make laughs. And that's a big thing of what we do here. You do it on all movies, but especially when you're dealing with CGI, where you might not see versions of it for weeks or months, and you're trying to create something that's spontaneous and immediate. But Buster Keaton would set up these crazy gags with, sides of buildings falling down, and not to mention stunts and things like that, and find humor in action. And looking at filmmakers like that, looking at other filmmakers who had done superhero films before, but ultimately it was about making us laugh, because you really can't tell what people are going to like. And the more specific you get, and the more you gear it towards your own personal sense of humor, it's not intuitively self-evident, but the more specific you make it, the more universal it tends to play. And when you try to make something that pleases everybody, you end up pleasing nobody, or just making something very mediocre. And fear often guides you to try to satisfy a lot of people. I think part of what the responsibility that was lifted was because this wasn't a comedy. We could just make it funny or not funny, and it wasn't judged by laughs. I had come off of Elf, where they let me do anything with the action sequences, but the humor, every joke is scrutinized, because that's where everybody's coming from. They're all coming from a comedy point of view. Here was the opposite. Here we looked at the storyboards and the action sequences, but we had tremendous freedom as to what the characters would say, and we found a lot of that in the editing room or through improvisation, multiple cameras. And we just cut in stuff that we liked, and if it didn't get a laugh, it didn't, and if it did, it was sort of a welcome surprise. And so I've been gravitating more towards films that have a genre or something else that's the main attraction, because it allows my humor to be either work or not work, or be subtle, but I'm never going for hard funny. And then it found its own personality through the editing process, and then we did it with the second one, and as other filmmakers came on board, I think Kevin continued to hire people, not because they had visual effects chops or because they had a background in action, but because they had an interesting voice and had a very specific sense of humor. And you see it's different in all movies, although it does share tones with this. Joss's films feel a little bit different than Peyton's, and you have James Gunn, and everybody has their own flavor of ice cream, as do the actors. And the actors really inhabit the roles too. They're not afraid to hire people who have strong personalities that they bring to the role because they cast them so well. So I think it comes down to the casting of the filmmakers and the casting of the actors. And of course, the one through line is Kevin is very involved creatively in it. And I think that as he probably helped guide these filmmakers through the process, in the back of his mind, this was kind of the pilot for the Marvel series, and so all of it feels consistent as the franchises unfold. And the balancing act is, how do you make it feel consistent so all those characters can come together and not feel like they're from completely different worlds, but make each one feel unique and original, so that when Ryan comes on, he could tell a personal story, and when James Gunn could come on, he could do a space opera, and they all feel different, but there is a unifying spirit to it that has to do, I think, to a large part by the infrastructure of Kevin's leadership.
Let's talk about Robert and casting Robert. I think there are a couple, people in film history. If you think of Sean Connery as James Bond, and Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, and Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, that are so iconic. What was the casting process? Because I think it's hard to forget that Robert Downey Jr. 10 years ago was a very different place. He wasn't the massive movie star that he is now, and he wasn't necessirally the obvious choice.
Not if you ask
him. He's an amazing.
He really was the same guy.
He was exactly the same guy, and when he came, we can talk about it, he ended up auditioning for it. He came in a car with his Team Downey crew, holding his suit, finely pressed suit. I was like, Team Downey, he has a team? Like, who are all these people? He was as ready for stardom as any human being who's ever existed. He knew he was capable of it, he knew he deserved it, and he knew what to do with it once he got it.
I remember reading some interviews, like when Johnny Depp broke out with Pirates, and it was something with Downey, and he just said, he's like, I'm talented enough, I could be that guy doing these giant movies, but he wasn't really doing anything at that moment.
Well, he was right, and we talked about Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow, which at the time was relevant, and people forget that he had not done necessarily big movies.
I don't think he'd ever had it before that.
No.
Yeah.
And that was an inspired bit of casting at the time. And I remember thinking, the expectations game, I always knock wood, I never take anything for granted. And as I was beginning to try to sell people outside of our inner group on Downey, I remember saying, I think it could be kind of inspired like Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow. They won't be that big, but it'll be like that.
I had a project around that time that I was writing, and when he got cast in this, like I remember, like we were trying to cast this other character, like writing the director in the studio. I was like, oh my god, Robert Downey Jr. He's amazing. Iron Man's probably he's gonna be a big star next summer. You should try to get him now. And the head of the studio wrote back, we're not making a fucking Robert Downey Jr. movie, Tim. Okay.
I know that it would not have happened at any other studio at that time. It wouldn't have, you know, it was hard doing it here. This was, an idea that there were other people who were offered the part.
Can you talk about who
you
else
talk
you guys
about
were
that after 10
looking
years,
at?
or we still don't talk about that?
I don't.
We don't
So,
talk.
well, it never.
They turned us down, by
It
the way.
was more like there was lists of names
Yes,
and there were
yes.
feelers sent out, but
Yes.
there was never anybody that we felt. It was a bit of it was sort of the name game and lists and trying to
Right.
get your green light and it's equations, and so it's not like we arrived on a name and we chased the name and then
Right.
they weren't interested.
Right.
As a matter of fact, the one person, because it was kind of a strange time, and it was a little bit like Moneyball, because there was a sense that it had to be made for a number, but because that number was low relative to what we were putting on the screen, there was ways of looking at it using ingenuity, not judging the elements, whether it's behind the camera, in front of the camera, by the standard metrics that the rest of the industry did. There were the same lists of names that everybody was going off of. They were all considered worth a certain amount of money. And if you really looked at the way these types of movies broke out, there was an aspect of the equation that wasn't really factored in, which was quality. You know, it's always like, who's in it? What are they worth in this territory? What's the genre? What's the date it's coming out? What's the budget? What's the studio? Underlying material. And all the people had the same spreadsheets that they were working off of. You know, there was a lot of math to it, and because we knew we had to get this movie made in a different way to get something on the screen that we were both proud of and delivered the scope that people had come to expect from the genre, we were able to reach out to somebody like Robert, who was quite frankly an undervalued asset. He was somebody who had more to offer than what his price was at the time, and because there was a certain cutoff to what we could spend, a lot of the people we weren't even considering because they were just out of our range. So we didn't even talk about a lot of the movie stars of the day. And then that equation, it became part of the Marvel way of making films, of hiring filmmakers who wouldn't normally be thought of. I mean, I wasn't on a list to do this kind of movie, and I think